welcome to Broken Entertainment. So I got a chance to watch Raya and the Last Dragon. And I'm going to try to be mostly spoiler-free here. But there might be a few just on accident, so just be aware of that. This movie is very, very, very frustrating. Because it's basically two different movies. Okay? For the first hour, I was looking at the clock. My skin was crawling because the dialogue was just so awful. And I just was like, oh my god, this movie. And then the last 30 minutes, you're like, oh wow, hey, look, this could have been good. And if the movie would get out of its own way, it'd be a pretty good movie. But it doesn't get out of its own way until the last 30 freaking minutes of the movie. And then by then you've already wanted to walk away because the dialogue makes your head explode. You know, if you kind of ignore the dialogue, if you just sit down and watch it with your brain turned off, it's fine. But if you think about this movie at all for 5 minutes, you're just gonna want to claw your eyes out. Because, well, probably your ears, because the dialogue is so horrible. I haven't seen movie dialogue this bad in a long time. And the reason it's so bad is because for the first hour, it's like they tried to get every SJW Twitter trope into the movie that they could possibly manage, and all the dialogue is ultra modern. And for most of the movie, I spent writing down my notes, and I'm like, oh my god, cringy teen dialogue, cringy teen dialogue, cringy teen dialogue. I'm like, this is modern teenage speak on people in an ancient world. It doesn't work. It pulls me out of the movie every time these people talk because they're constantly using this stupid dialogue. And I didn't even write down, I wrote down one example because it was one example that was particularly egregious where one of the characters says on the regular, and I just about wanted to jump through the TV screen. Because I'm like, why? Why are you saying these stupid modern phrases? And then I realized this isn't modern teen dialogue. This is someone who's trying to write what they think teenagers sound like. And in the process, what they're actually doing is just writing what people on Twitter sound like. Okay? So they're using all these phrases and ways of speaking that really only appear on Twitter. And I'm like, oh, that's where the dialogue's from. The interesting thing about this movie is that there's so much SJW crap forced into the first hour of it, but none of the movie itself isn't hateful. It opens with this awful exposition monologue. And a lot of Disney type movies open with monologues and some exposition, right? Moana, which is a movie I cite frequently as being a Disney masterpiece, modern Disney masterpiece, opens with an expository monologue. But the expository monologue in Moana is within the realm of the movie. It's an older person telling a story to young children. And it appears with this different animation style that matches the paintings and things that are on these mats that they use to tell a story. That's not what this is. This movie literally opens up, you see the main character on her bug rolling through a desert. And she literally opens up with the dialogue, I know what you're thinking, a lone rider, a dystopian wasteland, and I immediately just no, stop. Because now not only are you breaking the fourth wall immediately, But they wouldn't have the phrase dystopian. Okay, this is an ancient culture. It's a fantasy world, but it's an ancient world set in ancient, what we would consider ancient times, and they're using modern words like dystopian. And it's not a world that has fallen into this sort of ancient technology. It's been this way. So the modern dialogue doesn't work. And having her talk to you in the first opening lines, you're instead of being like, well, this is an interesting story they're telling children, and it's also serving the purpose of filling me in on the setting, it's like, oh, you're just telling me the setting. Great. Especially because she has no reason to say any of these things other than to inform the audience. She's not telling anybody a story. And I thought maybe when the movie started that way, I'm like, well, maybe she's talking to a group and we don't see that until the end of the movie. No, she's not. She's talking to the audience. Immediately pulls me out of it before I can even get into the movie. I'm just like, wow. Why? Also, I hate it when movie exposition claims to know what I'm thinking. I can't stand that. And throughout the whole exposition, it continues to break the fourth wall. So it's very off-putting immediately. And then you have the characters. And I'm going to mostly touch on their appearance here. The characters are okay. They're not great, but they're okay. Two of the characters have what I'm going to call SJW hair. And what that is half the head is shaved to a buzz cut, and the other half is long and flops over to one side of their head, and sometimes it's different colors. And I've literally never seen that in real life. I have seen that in a lot of comics, like a whole lot of comics, and the occasional animated short or what have you. And it's always done by these super far left SJW writers who seem to think that this haircut needs to be a thing, and they just keep trying to shove it in. And a lot of times what they use it as is a way of saying this person is edgy, they're kind of distant, or they're like maybe smarter than everyone sometimes. In this movie, it's to show that the person's edgy. They're edgy. There's literally only two people in the whole movie with this haircut, and it's one of the leaders and her daughter. And the daughter is this quote-unquote edgy person who likes knives, and she's very violent. The hair on its own, it bothers me on two levels. It bothers me, one, because I just keep seeing it shoved into stuff, and it's like, stop, nobody wears hair like this. But the other reason is, it's distinctly modern. So again, you're pulled out, like immediately, you're just like, oh, I'm watching a movie. Because, again, that kind of hair doesn't show up in the ancient world. It's just, you can look at the historical record and you don't see it anywhere. And in part because it's difficult to do. Okay? We do it with modern technology. You can't get that buzz cut with a straight blade. You can't. You might be able to do the whole, the other look is that they shave both sides of the head, but the top is long and floppy. You could pull that off. But, and again, someone could say, well, this is a fantasy world, so whatever. But no, not whatever. Because there are specific things that make something feel modern. And when you're supposed to be watching an ancient fantasy world and it feels modern, it doesn't work unless that's part of the world, which it's not. It's a completely different world from Earth. And that, it's just frustrating. It's like, why does this hair keep showing up? Why? Because the other thing it's going to do is dramatically date the movie. Okay, if you look at the hair, and again, I'm going to pull on Moana, but you can reference other Disney movies. They're the same way. If you look at Frozen, if you look at the hair in Tangled, if you look at the hair in any Disney movie, for the most part, it fits the time period it's in. Okay, or the culture that's in. Moana has long, kind of wavy hair. And sometimes she puts it up in a bun to get it out of the way, and she puts it up in this like Samoan bun, and it looks fine. And it fits the culture and the time period. It's fine. But in this movie, we've got, Raya's hair makes some sense. This is the character right here. It's long. It's fine. But that floppy, half buzzed look with one braid going down the middle, of course. That sets it in a specific. It's one of those things where 10 years from now or 15 years from now, somebody's going to be watching the movie and like, oh yeah, that is so 2020. You ever watch a movie and you go, oh boy, that is very 90s. That's what it's going to do. Same with the dialogue. The dialogue is going to be man, that is so 2021, 2020 time period. And that's the problem and they do a good job in one respect of the dialogue in that they put some words in it that are distinct to the fantasy culture they've created. That's good, but we'll get into the world building, and it has problems. Major problems. So when you combine those three things, the dialogue, the hair, the opening, you're just immediately just like, I didn't forget I was watching a movie until the last 30 minutes. Like I said, it's two totally different movies. And the plot is really weak. I know, it's a Disney plot, whatever. Right? So, but it's one of those plots where if you took out large elements of it, you wouldn't actually change the story. And that's not good. Moana and Frozen and Tangled all had pretty straightforward plots. There's no problem with a Disney movie having a simple, straightforward plot. But when you have large parts of the story that don't actually mean anything to the story, there's this. Most of the movie, they're on this MacGuffin chase. And the one thing you could give it is that it brings the character together with other characters from other nations, which is going to be important at the end of the movie. But you could do that anyway. Because the place they end up is at one end of the world and the place it starts at the other end of the world. So they could just travel and meet these people. So the MacGuffin chase, But whatever. It's a Disney movie. There's only so many, so much analysis you can do with Disney plot. Of course they kill the father. Oh yeah, spoiler. You're watching a Disney movie. Be prepared. There's a bit of an SJW food obsession too, and what I mean by that is in a lot of stories written by these people, they have a heavy emphasis on food. Now, there's an element in the story much later on in the movie where the food thing actually kind of matters, and it kind of matters in the beginning too, but there's a lot of food stuff interspersed in the middle that's just like, why is this here? And that's it's like a bunch of Marvel comic writers got together and made this movie. Not a compliment. There's fart jokes. There's these beetles they call toot booms. When they get distressed, they fart and the fart explodes. It's, yeah, I'll just let that stand on its own. The main villain is a woman. Well, girl, actually. I mean, woman, technically, because she's going to be, see, they were 12 when it started, because Disney has this thing with girls being 12 when the movie starts, and then when the movie resumes, they're 16. So, or no, it's been 6 years. So they're 18. So they're women. They're adults. You know, in the perspective of an ancient fantasy world, they 16 would make them adults either way. Um, but the villain is kind of mannish in like build. She's got these really wide shoulders. It's kind of like weird. And I think they try to do that because she's supposed to be this warrior, this physically fit person. But Raya is also a fighter. But she's not really a warrior in the same sense, I suppose. But the thing about that build is that it really kind of only works for certain types of athlete, and it doesn't really work for a warrior. And it's just one of those things. I think if it weren't combined with the hair and all the other crap, I wouldn't even really notice it, but I noticed it because of all that. It's not distractingly mannish. It's not. She doesn't look like a man. You're not like, whoa. But it's a little odd. Her overall appearance is just a little odd. So the dragon design I didn't like, but the dragon's animation is fantastic. I do want to give it that. It's very fluid. It's very sinuous. Very fitting for the type of dragon that it is, and I thought they did an excellent job with that. As far as the world building goes, it's very, very shallow. There's on when you look at the surface level, it's pretty good. But you also have it drawn down to this point where there's these different nations, and they're all kind of supposed to be built on this like one or two attributes, which is a hallmark of shallow world building. Okay, there's no depth to any of these cultures. There's not really a culture to any of these cultures. There's a veneer of culture, but you never get deep into it. And that's kind of where the whole Asian thing has a problem as well, because it's supposed to be an Asian world, but the Asian appearance is just a veneer. It's so loosely based that you'd forget about it if you weren't thinking about it. Because it really does come down to just physical appearances. There's no time spent with any of these cultures. There's no time spent on any culture. So you're not really drawn into that. But the things that that do appear for the world building, the insertion of words, the way everybody greets somebody, that kind of thing is done very well, but it's only surface level work. You've got to do more. Even for a Disney movie. You know, there needs to be more in depth to everything because it's so shallow when you start to look at it. You can't identify any of these cultures. They have to remind you constantly. Sometimes by physically having the words show up when they appear in a different nation. So you know, it kind of struggles for me from that perspective of there's just no depth to the world. And that's a shame because as you see the second movie, and by the second movie I mean the second half, it's totally different. And you can see the promise there that could have been fulfilled but wasn't because they were too busy spending the first half of the movie using modern dialogue and making fart jokes. So there's this sequence of scenes where she meets this character that's a toddler, that's like a 1-year-old, and it's living with some monkeys because parents are dead because it's a Disney movie. And The baby literally kicks her onto her ass. And I'm just like, what? Like, come on. I mean, there's plenty of parts where the baby does something and it's just like, that's not, no, no, that's not, no. No toddler is achieving any of these things. And they try to make it a cute character and it doesn't really work for me. It does in parts. But again, it's all at the end of the movie. Okay? In the middle of the movie, you're like, why is this, why? There's no songs. I like Disney movie songs, so not having songs kind of sucks. The thing is, Raya and this main villain, who's not a villain, because of course no woman in this kind of movie could ever truly be evil. They just have to be misunderstood, right? They have the same hair at 12 that they have at 18. And I know it's an ancient culture, but come on. Like, people change their hair over time. You don't have the exact same haircut for 6 years. Generally. Unless you're like me, but most people don't have the same haircut for 6 years. Especially women. You know, and especially as you go from childhood to adulthood, it's gonna change. I'm sorry. People tend to keep the same haircut for long periods of time once they're into and through part of their adulthood because it's just kind of this pattern they get stuck into and that's what they like. So, but early on, no, they're not gonna stick with the same hair. And it's just something that kind of stuck out to me. The only thing in the plot that stood out to me that was just like, oh my god. There's two parts. I'm gonna push off as the person was 12 and overly trusting. So I won't really dive into that. Also, it's an important part of the plot. So the other one is like there's this part where she goes back to the place she grew up in, and the dragon shows her these dragon statues that are, frozen dragons, and she's like, "Oh my god, I had no idea these were here." I'm like, how did you not see the gigantic dragon statues? They're huge. They're like 12 feet tall. How did you not see these? It just didn't make any sense. Why? So, then in the second half of the movie, not second half, in the last 30 minutes of the movie, all of a sudden everything gets serious. And there's apocalyptic stuff going on, there's a lot of fighting, the dialogue suddenly tightens up and gets serious, and all the modern crap goes away. And all of a sudden, you're invested in the movie. It's like, oh wow, there's a movie in here. This could have been a good movie. If the rest of the movie had been done with the same tone as the last 30 minutes, without all the stupid dialogue, and without the floppy-headed hair, and without the jokes that don't land, because there's like 3 jokes in the whole movie and none of them work. If they had focused on that tone, it could have been a good movie. But they're trying to like cram all these like tropes in from Twitter in the beginning for some reason, and it just doesn't work. It's like they're trying to be hip and cool with all this modern quote unquote dialogue, and it just falls so flat and pulls you out of the movie. And not to mention the exposition in the beginning. It's like if you had done the rest of the movie the way you did the last 30 minutes, you could have had something. As far as the animation goes, sure, it looks fine. It looks good, but the problem is it looks like every Disney movie since like 2012. Okay? And that technology really it peaked for me with Moana, where you start to see, like, when Maui breathes in, you see his rib cage flex when he breathes. You start to see this really realistic, cool stuff. And then this movie is 6 years later, and they haven't advanced any of it. You know, the particle effects look better, but woohoo! You know, Disney's not pushing the envelope with anything anymore. And that's a shame. Disney should be pushing animation technology. They should be at the forefront of everything. And it's like, okay, all movies look like this now, so whatever. I should be impressed. The only thing that impressed me was the movement of the dragon. I thought that was really good, like I said. Yeah, I mean, that's really it. It's like, if the first hour of the movie is almost just like crawl out of your own skin levels of cringe, but the last 30 minutes, you're like, there was a story here, and you dropped it. You just totally dropped the ball trying to sound cool instead of focusing on a good story. Not that the plot's especially great, but there's this tone that's just missing from the rest of the movie, that in the last half you're like, oh wow, I finally get what you're trying to do. And it just sucks to see that they... It's why I think this movie gets the rating that it does. Not from critics, but from fans. Which is in the general, like, decent level, right? On Metacritic, it's like 7.6 or something. Because the last half hour is actually intriguing. You know, the threats are suddenly real in the last half hour, whereas in the first big chunk of the movie, they're like, every now and then they show up just to show up, and you're like, oh, okay, you know, but there it is. The other thing about the world building that drove me nuts is, so there's been this big apocalypse, and everybody's been reduced to one city each, essentially, and a couple of nations are basically completely destroyed. And you find out that that's only like thousands of people. And so this whole world just doesn't work. But it could have. And the movie could have worked. And you're like, why did you spend so much time trying to sound cool instead of focusing on your movie? Could have been good. It's not. Is it watchable with children? Sure. You know, whatever. I'm not going to put it on purpose. You know, there's a lot of better movies out there from Disney. But none of it lands at all when they try to make jokes. There's not really much levity in the whole movie. But at the same time, it's not really dark. It's just there. And it's not until the end that you're like, there's everything I was looking for. Where did it go? Why was it hiding in the last 30 minutes? So, I don't know. Let me know what you think if you've seen it in the comments down below. If you like the video, hit the like button. If you're not subscribed, please consider subscribing and hit the bell for notifications. I will see you next time.